According to Sincero, the idea of nature versus nurture was first brought up by Sir Francis Galton in his 1874 publication of Englishmen of Science, Their Nature and Nurture. In this book, he argued that heredity is what causes a difference in intelligence and character traits. He developed this idea well before the modern science of genetics. This theory was in opposition of what philosopher John Locke believed, which is that when children are born they are a complete blank slate, and their traits develop completely from learning and experiences. This brings up the psychological question of whether intelligence is developed from genes passed from parent to offspring, or if one's environment is the sole cause of IQ, or perhaps it is a mix of one's environment and heredity. What we are going to try to find out is which one affects intelligence more. To begin with, we need to know what heritability actually means. According to Wade and Tavris, heritability applies only to a particular group living in a particular environment. An example shown in the textbook demonstrated this by showing how children in one group who all have money, eat the same kind of high-quality food, have attentive parents, and go to the same high-end school would only have intellectual differences based on their genetics, since all of their environmental factors would be entirely the same. However, children in a separate group that have variances in their monetary status, diet, schools, and types of parents would mean that this group's intellectual differences would be caused by environmental differences, and keep the heritability of intelligence for this group low. In addition, there was a study shown in the textbook that followed 48,000 American children from the time of birth until they were 7 years old. The study showed that children from impoverished families had an astounding 60% variance of IQ that was accounted for by environmental factors, while the contribution of genes held close to no significance. The exact reverse was found in affluent families, where heritability was found to be extremely high, and shared environmental factors contributed hardly at all. Additionally, the question of if nature or nurture affect intelligence more than the other may actually be the wrong question to ask. According to MacLeod, children that tend to be more underprivileged, like those in the African American community, tend to score lower on the same IQ test that other white children have taken, and maybe because they do not have the same access to material resources, or have the same opportunities that many white children receive simply due to birthright. However, the tests that have been done on twins may actually prove that heredity may hold the key to intelligence, as explained in the following videos.
Now let's look at how nature and nurture affect IQ. Identical twins share 100% of their genetic makeup. They're genetically identical. Fraternal twins share only 50% of their genetic makeup. This is also true for siblings and parents. So you share 50% of your genetic makeup with each one of your parents. So 50% with your mom and 50% with your dad. And you share 25% of your genetic makeup with your grandparents, aunts, uncles, nieces, and nephews. And people you're not related to? Well, you guessed it. You share 0% of your genetic makeup with them. So we can turn these percentages into numbers ranging from 0, not related, to 1, being identical twins. This is called genetic relatedness. Now, environment has to vary too. Typically, biological parents and children live in the same household, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have the exact same environment, but it is very similar. Now, of course, there's also cases where biological parents and siblings are raised completely separate from each other. For example, when people are adopted. Now, let's look at a graph to show how IQ is related to different types of nature and nurture. Here are IQ correlations. Remember, 0, 1, 2, 3, not very good. They're not really related. But high correlations mean they're really similar. And here, we'll see if they share an environment or not, meaning if they live together or if they don't. So first, let's look at identical twins. They have a 1 on genetic relatedness. Here, we can see that identical twins who were raised together have a 0.85 correlation between IQ scores. So because they're genetically identical and they were raised in the same environment, their IQ scores are really similar. But we know nature matters because identical twins who also have a 1 in genetic relatedness, because they're genetically identical but were raised apart, so they didn't share the same environment, have a 0.75 IQ correlation, meaning they're still really similar but not as close as if they were to live together. Now let's look at genetic relatedness of 0.5, meaning sharing 50% of your genetic makeup. So fraternal twins share 50% of their genetic makeup. Those who are raised together, so they shared an environment, have a correlation of about 0.6. So that's pretty related. However, if they're raised apart, it goes just below 0.4, showing that environment does play a big factor in IQ. Siblings, again, who you share 50% of your makeup with, those who are raised together with a shared environment have just below a 0.5 correlation, so it's not very related. However, if the siblings were raised apart, so they didn't share an environment, this significantly drops to just above a 0.2, which is a really low correlation. And parents who raised their children, so sharing an environment with them, again had less than a 0.5 correlation. However, when they didn't share an environment, again it drops to about a 0.2. These show the importance of environment. Now let's look at adoption. So these people have zero genetic relatedness, but they share the same environment. So adopted siblings are just above a 0.3 in their IQ correlation, and adopted parents are just below a 0.2 in their correlation. Even though they shared the same environment, they didn't have a very strong correlation among IQ scores. That shows us that genetics are an important factor too. The formal conclusion of these studies says that about 50% of the differences between people's intelligence is due to genetic influence, and about 40% is due to environmental effects. That leaves 10% being unexplained, so we just don't know yet.
Hi everyone, Crystal here with D News. Were you born to be good at school? Well, straight-up intelligence might not be all it's cracked up to be. Studies are discovering a plethora of other biological factors that influence our success in school, and they say most of them are heritable. It seems obvious to succeed in school you simply have to be born with intelligence, and then the environment takes over and molds you into the upstanding citizen you're going to become. But scientists at King's College in London are saying that's not entirely true, and other genetic factors may be more important than we first thought. In a paper recently published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, researchers made a controversial assertion that our performance on standard assessment tests is determined by our DNA. Now, in their paper, they state that genetic thinking counters the deplorable tendency to blame teachers and parents rather than recognizing that learning is inherently more difficult for some children, and differences in children's educational achievement are more a matter of genes than schools or home environments. Wow. Well, they came to this conclusion by examining the performance of 6,653 pairs of twins on a nationwide examination of academic achievement, which is administered in the UK at age 16. That's the GCSE for you Brits out there, and if you live in the US, just think SAT. The twins were already registered in an early development study, and so additional genetic and cognitive information was available for the study participants. Each pair of twins lived at home with the same parents, so the researchers were able to control for environmental factors and examine only the effect of genetic variation on exam scores. Now here's where it gets interesting. The scientists broke the pool of twins into two groups: identical twins, which share 100% of the same genetic composition, and fraternal twins, who share only 50% of the same genetic composition. In this way, they were able to show that genetic similarity was a greater indicator of test performance than a similarity in home environment. The study looked at the twins' intelligence scores, but also confidence, personality, self and parent-reported behavioral problems, and more. And they say that what on the surface seems like environmental influence, like behavioral problems, can actually be linked to causal genetic traits like attention and extroversion or introversion. Furthermore, they assert that education is not a passive process, and children actively choose what experiences they're exposed to. This link between experience and preferences determined by genotype is known as genotype-environment correlation. Obviously, there's a lot that needs to get unpacked here, but the study introduces a really great nature versus nurture issue. The authors clearly argue that nature, genetic factors, are more powerful and important than nurture or environmental factors.
The tendencies and intelligence of human beings has been decided to be affected by our environment, but also our heredity, more so the heredity. Brain tracking methods such as diffusion tensor imaging or DTI fiber tracking is an MRI-type neuroimaging technique which allows scientists to see the location, orientation, and anisotropy of brain's white matter tracts. These methods further disentangle genes and environmental factors that influence human being brain structure throughout life. Rather than looking at the brain, researchers can look at infants' John Bowlby, a renowned psychoanalyst, believed that yes, babies may cling to their mothers, but it is not for cliche reasons of love and care that many of us believe to be true. It is that they are clinging to a motherly figure due to an innate sense of survival. If this innate sense is not fulfilled, the child will not develop the way a normal child would. These changes can show up as slowness in school, delinquency, and a reduced intelligence. Later on in life, criminal activity and divorcing one's spouse can be traced back to the category of nature. When we think of internal factors, many assume the brain. The Greek philosopher Hippocrates did not leave it to just this. He believed that our personality traits were due to concentrations of 4 types of bodily fluids. These fluids being namely blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. He then categorized them as temperaments, and they were renamed sanguine, choleric, melancholic, and phlegmatic. A sanguine, ruled by blood personality, is generally active, social, and optimistic. Someone who is choleric, ruled by yellow bile, is independent, motivated, and decisive. A melancholic, ruled by black bile person, is detail-oriented, deeply emotional, and analytical. Lastly, a phlegmatic person, ruled by phlegm, is in many cases relaxed, calm, and peaceful. We see the effects of nature appear mostly in a person's susceptibility to physical or mental health. Illnesses that affect a person's parents or grandparents can be genetically sent to the child, increasing their likelihood of the sickness developing in them. Examples of this is heart disease, cancer, anxiety, and depression. The same can be said for intelligence. In the eyes of many scientists, intelligence of a person can be broken down also. Intelligence, according to Edward Thorndike, can be classified into 3 types: social, mechanical, and abstract. Social intelligence was defined as a person's empathy and ability to manage others. Mechanical intelligence can be boiled down to one's control of their body, while abstract thinking, on the other hand, was defined as verbal and symbolic thinking. Another scientist, Raymond B. Cattell, decided that there was only 2 types of intelligence, these being fluid and crystallized. Fluid intelligence is the ability to solve problems and think with common sense. Crystallized intelligence, on the other hand, was using experience for skills. Cattell believed that fluid intelligence grew until an adolescence of a person, and then declined, while crystallized grew slowly and plateaued for mostly the early adulthood, and then declined later in life. Intelligence is an internal being growing not from one's environment, but rather the structure of our genetics and what is inside someone's body.